Hello, good morning. Happy Sunday with Dr. Childress. I'm a little under the weather today, so I'll be um, more somber perhaps in my discussion today as I'm recovering from a week out and about into the broader world. Let me just see here. I spent last week testifying. I traveled for testimony and had three testimonies last week. Two of them were remote and one was in person. And that's exhausting. The travel is exhausting. Testimony is massively exhausting. It typically takes me one day to recover for every day I testify. And so I had three of them without any recovery days. And I've gotten a little ill, a little sick. But now I'm home, settled in yesterday, traveled back here yesterday, and settled in a little bit. So now I'll be recovering from a little bit of an illness and trying to get my life back on track. Today I want to talk about cairn, Cairn. That's a term for little piles of stones. I used to go backpacking when I was a young man. I go up to the Sierras every summer. And once you can't find the trail, there's a procedure that's done where we stack up little stones to show where the trail heads out. And that becomes particularly important once you're above tree line and there's no dirt. There's just all rock. And so there's no way to tell where the trail is. And so when you come up to a point where you've lost the trail, you stop and you look around to find where the little pile of rocks are that's left by other hikers and other people. And then you walk from cairn to cairn. So they're markers on the path. And because I'm sort of leading the path here into a solution, there are cairn that I know will be coming and markers or points in the development of the solution. And we're passing several of them right now. So I want to talk about what those are. The first cairn that we're passing is my death. That I figure I'm 68 years old with my next birthday, and I figure I got about 5 years left. My father left at 74. Neither one of my brothers made it. Older brothers made it to 70. So my estimate is around 72, 74. Most likely a stroke or something with the heart. I hope I don't get my body start to fall apart in other ways. So I hope to leave rather quickly, and my estimate's about 5 years. Now I might go 10, but after about 72, 74, it's gonna be diminishing capacity for me. I don't want to spend my last few years on this rock involved in this family court business. It's brutal. It's abusive to psychologists that are over here, and I'll talk about that in a second. This is an abusive field to work in. And I'm tired of being abused. I'm tired I've worked my life in trauma, from spina bifida, working with the families of birth defects and families of cancer, families that have autism, families with schizophrenia in a child. And then over to foster care with the little ones, 3 to 5 years old in foster care. And now over to this pathology. That is tremendously brutal. And it's brutal to the children, it's brutal to the parents. This is probably the most savage spousal abuse possible. And the absence of empathy from the psychologist is phenomenal for the parents over here. So this is very brutal. And I have to keep a check on my empathy sometimes just for vicarious trauma to the parents here. And it destroys the lives of children, and nobody cares. The mental health people, none of the mental health people care. The courts doesn't care. Nobody cares what's happening over here. And I've been over here for 10 years. So the vicarious trauma is high. Plus, it's an abusive pathology that the narcissistic borderline dark personalities that are over here are very vengeful and retaliatory. Now, the forensic psychologists don't interfere with what they're doing. In fact, they collude with it. So the pathology is not dangerous to them. Plus, they all do the same thing, so they self-protect themselves. But I'm a clinical psychologist over here, and I'm the only one that's over here because none of the other clinical psychologists will come here. So I came here and willing to endure the abuse and the dangers associated with this because somebody has to. And so this pathology, though, the pathology itself is very dangerous and very retaliatory against clinical psychologists who try to alter it. And if we misstep somehow, we'll get sanctions on our license or lose our license. And so the way I would describe it to attorneys in the legal profession is imagine if the attorney had to put their law license on the line with every case. Every single case, they had to put their law license on the line. That if they ask a question in the wrong way or the wrong question, they could lose their law license. How many attorneys would practice in family law if they had to put their law license on the line every single case? But that's what you're asking the psychologist to do. Every single case, as a clinical psychologist, I'm putting my license on the line. And there is opposing counsel whose sole goal is to discredit my testimony in any way possible, including going after my license. If I say something wrong or say something in the wrong way during testimony, the pathological parent and their attorney will file complaints and go after my license. So no clinical psychologist will work with your pathology. And there's a reason for that. The pathology is creating the danger to drive away the clinical psychologist by making it too dangerous to work here. And so about the 1980s, that risk management issue prompted a risk management response from professional psychology of giving you your own special psychologists. They call them clinical forensic psychologists. So you have your own special psychologist just for you. Autism doesn't, ADHD doesn't, schizophrenia doesn't, no other pathology, no other problem has their own special psychologist just in the family courts, and it's to deal with the dangerousness of the pathology. And the solution now, they developed this, your own special psychologist, is a failed model of service delivery. We've had 40 years of it, and all it has led to is the exploitation of the families, the parents over here for your money. Everybody is exploiting you. And so the exploitation of a vulnerable population, they solve nothing, and the quality of mental health services has just reached the absolute bottom. It's below the APA ethics code. It's below, the forensic psychologists are the worst imaginable. And they are just exploiting parents for their money. But no one cares. The AFCC doesn't care. The AAPA doesn't care. No one cares because they've abandoned you. They've abandoned these families because you're too dangerous. So there's no treatment providers over here. And the forensic psychologists we've given you, they don't diagnose, meaning they don't identify the pathology, the problem. So they don't identify what the problem is. They don't diagnose what the pathology is. They exempt themselves from all ethical standards, including competence. So they're just ignorant and incompetent. And that's okay with everybody because the clinical people, the APA, and those people have abandoned you. So returning a little back to the first Karen we're passing here, is as a clinical psychologist, when I came over here about 10 years ago, um, this is a nightmare. And it's a nightmare for my people, my psychology people. And there's a massive unethical practice that I've got obligations, understand it, 1.04 and 1.05. I'm not allowed to walk away. Plus, this is failure in their duty to protect. So there's active child abuse and active spousal abuse in which the psychologists are participating. And that's just a nightmare. So somebody had to do something about it. And look at me, old guy. Okay, look at my Vita. I've worked just about every possible pathology in just about every possible setting, from NIMH research studies to community clinics. I've had my own clinic as senior staff. I've worked in psych hospitals and suicide prevention hotlines. So I've worked pretty much the entire scope of positions with the entire scope of different types of pathology. So if not me, as a clinical psychologist, to come and work in the family courts, who is? I had to put my license on the line. There's nobody who's going to put their license on the line. So I had to been walking very carefully to stay out of trouble. Because there's a lot of people who want to hurt me. The pathology wants to hurt me, the opposing counsel wants to hurt me, and the forensic psychologists want to hurt me. They want me to go away because I'm exposing their ignorance and incompetence. And so I'm dangerous to them, plus I'm interfering with their cash cow of $20,000 to $40,000 per useless assessment, forensic custody evaluation. Forensic psychology is a failed model in service delivery to a vulnerable population. The APA and forensic psychology, the AFCC, needs to engage a discussion about that. And there's a cairn that will come when they start opening up debates. And put me, Dr. Childress, on the clinical psychology, pick a forensic psychologist. I got Stahl and Simon, pick either one of those. Put them on a debate with Dr. Childress, the role of forensic psychology versus clinical psychology. Make them defend themselves because it's indefensible. So, but given that situation, I came over here, put myself on the line. And for the past 10 years, I've been giving away my knowledge. Now, typically, psychologists, that's what we sell, is our knowledge and our expertise. But I've been giving it away because I've been turning the parents into informed consumers of mental health services because they need to protect their children. And the ones who should protect, the psychologists, are failing. They're the betrayers in trauma pathology. They're the ones who should protect and don't. A lot of times that's the mother in the sex abuse situation who sacrifices the child to the stepdad in order to save her marriage. That's called the betrayer, bystander role of betrayer. And in this pathology, it's the forensic psychologists who are betraying their children, betraying the court, betraying everybody just for their money. And they're not discussing it. Now, they know Dr. Childress is here. They're just simply ignoring Dr. Childress. The differential diagnosis is between child abuse by the targeted parent or psychological child abuse, a shared persecutory delusion by the allied parent. That's a differential diagnosis. But they're ignoring that because the moment they recognize that, they recognize everything I'm saying is true. That means they haven't been doing it, and they are incompetent for the last 40 years because none of them are competent in the assessment of delusional thought disorders or attachment pathology or anything. So one of the things I've been doing over the last 10 years is I had to allow the parents to exploit me and basically feed off of me because everybody else is exploiting the parents. And so it had to be done. But at this point in time, it doesn't need to be done anymore. With 2020 and the COVID that came through, that was one of the cairn. That was the cairn of my death. That I figure I caught COVID in 2020 and died. I was out and I had to do a dance with invisible death for 6 months. That if I had caught COVID, I'm a dead human. And it was pretty distressing that these all you Republican people who didn't wear a mask, are willing to kill Dr. Childress because you're inconvenienced by a piece of cloth over your face. You know, that was disturbing to me, to think that you're willing to kill me. And at this point in time, yeah, if I'm dead in 2020, everything's fixed. And that was sort of my goal, is to get up and get everything to you so that if I leave at that transition point, then you still have all the information you need to fix things. So because I didn't actually die, I made it to a safe haven, I get a little extra time. Okay, so I get an extra 5 years. Now, do you think I want to be spending it with being harassed and slandered and put my license on the line and lied about? And I'm doing all this on my own. For APA is not lifting a finger. No psychologist is lifting a finger. No parents really lifting a finger. That I am doing this entirely on my own. No one's ever come to me and said, Dr. Childress, what can I do to be helpful? Okay. I've seen parents pop up occasionally and they want to create a new movement or a group or become coaches or things, but that has short staying power because all the parents are focused mostly on their own individual cases and your life moves on. And some of you continue to have the pain and suffering and want to do things, but you're not coming together as a group. Over in ADHD, they've got CHAD, they've got parent groups, NAMI for mental health services, autism. They all advocate for themselves and advocate effectively. You think about Individuals with Disabilities Act. We get the ADHD parents and autism parents got Individuals with Disabilities Act got a functional behavioral analysis required in all schools if you're going to put in a behavior plan. If you're going to put in a behavior plan in the school for problem behavior, the school must do a functional behavioral analysis. But the family courts, there's no requirement for that. There's no requirement for anything in the family courts because there's no advocacy over here. The parents are ineffective in doing that because you're all focused on your own individual case and you're all traumatized. But also, you don't have any allies in psychology. So over in ADHD or autism, there's ADHD and autism clinical psychologists who also advocate with the parents. Over here in the family courts, you only got one, me, just one. Because all the forensic psychologists are not advocating for a solution. They're not working for a functional behavioral analysis or knowledge of attachment or the shared persecutory delusion, mental status, and they're not advocating for any of that because they're just taking your money for a 6 to 9 month evaluation on things. Another thing, I just testified in a couple of cases. The legal system is broken. Massively broken around this. So here we have potential child abuse, and these cases get continued for months and months and months when it's possible child abuse. And so clinical psychologists become very frustrated with the court system. We're putting our license on the line, and you're just dragging your feet about child abuse. But a clinical psychologist cannot say this child needs to be separated from the abusive parent, because that's a custody thing, and we will lose our license if we make a custody recommendation without doing a custody evaluation. It's a rigged system, and nobody's looking at the rigged system. Where's the APA on this? So over here, for the last 10 years, as a clinical psychologist, what I do is I document stuff. So I've been documenting stuff. I've been documenting the corruption and the malpractice in the AFCC. I've been documenting the collusion and corruption within the American Psychological Association. I've been documenting the flying monkeys. I've been documenting the PAS experts. I've been documenting the forensic psychologists one at a time. And I am the most experienced professional over here in what's happening because I get to read forensic psychology reports all the time. These forensic psychologists just read their own reports and they don't read anybody else's. The attorneys just read one or two here or there for their particular. I'm brought in and I've read a lot over the last 10 years, so I know what the quality of practice is in the psychologists, and I know what happens in the court system. So, old guy, 10 years. So I'm the most experienced psychologist over here serving in that role as a consultant to the forensic, and they are just awful. So one of the cairn that is shifting. Well, first off, that no clinical psychologist will come work, because why should we put our license on the line if the legal system doesn't care? And we got forensic psychologists who are equally as dangerous to us. So, example of that, documentation of that. Here I am advocating for a higher standard of practice, that we apply ethical code standards and those sorts of things, that duty to protect obligations, professional standards of practice to protect the consumer. What happens? The forensic psychologists on the Oregon licensing boards sanction me because my report resulted in a board complaint about a psychologist in Oregon. And that's all it was used for, was to support a board complaint about a forensic psychologist in Oregon. So they sanctioned me for exposing the ignorance of, that's not consumer protection. They're protecting the forensic psychologist incompetence from the consumer. And that's your licensing boards. And so I've documented that, and it's in appeal, and we'll find out what happens with the appeal. Either way, it doesn't matter. It's if it comes back negative, I just get licensed in Oregon, make it a moot point. But it's used in the custody litigation to imply that I'm somehow unethical because I was sanctioned by the licensing board. It's like, no, why would a psychologist, clinical psychologist, put up with that nonsense? We don't. We go work with ADHD or autism or anything other than the family courts. We're driven away. The treatment psychologists are driven away from the family courts so that the family courts get the lowest quality of mental health services. It's part of the pathology. The pathology is doing this by making itself so dangerous. It drives us away and draws in the incompetence, its allies, to the pathology, and drives everything down to the bottom, isolates you from any support. In 2018, I did a petition to the APA, wrote it up based on a previous year. Some parents put together a petition to the APA, some parent advocates. Where are they now? They've gone, and that's the issue. There's a pop of energy, and then it just drops away, a pop of energy. But they did a petition to the APA, and they tried to research it, and good, but it's from parents, not a psychologist. So I thought that was an interesting approach. So I watched what the APA did, and they killed it by referring to a committee of forensic psychologists who they wouldn't tell who was on the committee or anything or what was their mandate, and they've produced nothing. They've never responded to that first petition. So I waited a year for a response, and I wrote a second petition focusing on the ethical issues, violations. And 20,000 parents signed that. I hand delivered it with some others, parent advocates, to the office in Washington, D.C., so made sure they know it and get it. And they were a little resistant about even taking them. We got it to them. And what did they do with it? They referred it to committee, and death by committee. They never responded. 20,000 parents complaining to the APA to look into the ethical violations. And the first remedy was simply to issue a press statement saying that emphasizing their support for standard 2.01 boundaries of competence. So the APA would not even issue a press release supporting their own ethics code when asked by 20,000 parents in the family courts. They've abandoned you, completely abandoned you, and treat you with contempt and such disrespect. 20,000 parents, you don't even deserve an answer. Not even an answer. That's what I documented into them. And what did you parents do with that? You just drop it, and you're not harassing the APA asking them for an answer to your petition. No, you just kind of move on because you think it's my responsibility to solve things, and you're focused on your own individual cases. And so I gave you on a platter, I gave you a way to just continue on with the APA and start what happened with this petition. Where did it go? Who's there? Nothing from you. Attorneys. In my mind, I'm a psychologist. There's lawsuits over here. Somehow, some way. Why are these families, this select class, this select group of families given their own special psychologists that are the worst imaginable, that don't diagnose and don't treat the pathology they work with? And the courts must use these psychologists to decide custody. Why? Why can't a clinical psychologist decide, hey, that parent's really a problem and the child shouldn't be with that parent, without doing a forensic psychology custody evaluation that vary so massively in quality? There's no standardization over here. But the big ones, the 6 to 9 month ones, if that's necessary, if they're actually proposing that this 6 to 9 month is necessary to make a custody, then they should be giving it to all families. That's standard, or that's principle D, justice, equal access and equal quality. But we don't have equal access because it depends on money, and you don't have equal quality because that also depends on money. So if you have the money, you get a superior quality. And if you don't have money, you get like whatever nonsense you can get together on this. There's no standardization, and the American Psychological Association doesn't care. The forensic psychologist, AFCC, doesn't care. And it's a failed model in service delivery to a vulnerable population. And because of it's a risk management thing for the psychologists. And none of you attorneys can figure out a lawsuit around that. Jeez Louise. Okay, really? You can't figure out a lawsuit around a select group of people being given their own special psychologists that the court must use and that are the worst imaginable. No one's trying to solve this. No one is. Not the attorneys. Family law attorneys are making huge amounts of money off of this. They're going to trials. That's massively expensive to pay an attorney for a trial. But that's a little cottage industry we have over here. These child custody cases, high conflict cases. And then they get referred to a forensic psychologist who solves nothing and comes back 6 to 9 months, and these things go on for years, and it's been that way for 40 years, and no one's solving it. No one's talking about it. There's no debates about the role of forensic psychology versus clinical psychology. Nothing. No one's trying to solve it. Except me. And I'm tired. The attorney flew me down to their case because they thought it would be more impressive to have Dr. Childress in the courtroom. And it is, probably is, to have me sitting there a few feet away from the judge testifying, carries more impact. But it takes years off my life. I came out there, and I'm sick now. I caught something being out there, and this is taking a wear and tear on me. And nobody cares about that. The attorney doesn't care about me or what happens to me or the fact that I have two other cases I have to test. No, they're looking at their own. Each attorney is looking at their own individual case. I had to board my cat, Mr. Pippin, for a week while I was out of town in a little cage in a little boarding place. I went and picked him up yesterday. He was upset. He's so happy to be home right now. You made me hurt my cat. You made me hurt Mr. Pippin. I'm not doing that anymore. No, I'm not doing that anymore. So there's not a single psychologist who has contacted me and said, how can I be helpful? There's no one else out there who is moving the ball forward. They're all just taking your money and exploiting you. I've documented everything. I will be working up that documentation over the next, 6 months, a year. I figure I'll go on YouTube. This is Facebook Live is an early advance into that. I'm staying active, and I've got to focus on getting up on YouTube. I'm going to expand my YouTube presence, though, to other things like ADHD, the treatment of ADHD, treatment, child therapy generally, child therapy for all forms of things. I'm a full-service clinical psychologist, not just a family court psychologist. I've solved the pathology over here. I've told everybody what the diagnosis is. I can tell you what the treatment is for it. But as soon as you won't care about it, I will do that. Until you care about it, I'm going to go to other stuff now. I've solved it. Okay, so I will come up with the YouTubes and document the various aspects of things. And once I leave the planet, okay, a few years from now, then I imagine I'll become very popular, and people will start, talking about Dr. Childress and persecutory delusions and stuff. But that's won't do me any good. I'm out of here. So watch that. Once I leave, watch the response of psychology and the legal profession to Dr. Childress, that when he was here, he gets totally ignored. When I'm gone, then they start saying, oh, Dr. Childress, well, where were you when I was here? Why am I the only one who's enforcing ethics standards? Where are the licensing boards? We got 50 licensing boards, one for each state. Where are they enforcing? Why aren't they having a seminar? Any licensing board can get a hold of me and say, Dr. Childress, come out and let's present a seminar to our forensic psychologists on their ethical obligations. Give me a call. Invite me. They don't care. Why not? Because they're controlled by the forensic psychologist. And well, let's get the law school to host a symposium or debate on the value of clinical psychology versus forensic psychology in the family courts. Give me a call. Not a single call. They don't care. They don't want to know. The legal system doesn't want to fix it. The mental health system doesn't want to fix it because they're getting massive amounts of money. The family law attorneys are getting all their money for trials that solve nothing, and the forensic psychologists are getting all their money. All because this is an immensely dangerous pathology, and no clinical psychologists are here. No treatment people are here. We have treatments for ADHD, autism, trauma, you name it, eating disorder. We got treatments for everything. Borderline personality, DBT therapy. So I'm saying we should have DBT therapy over here adapted to the family court. Why hasn't anybody adapted DBT to the family courts in 40 years? Because the clinical psychologists are gone. There's no treatment people over here. So you have no treatments. None. And you have no competence. You have nobody who's competent to deliver a treatment. No one who's competent to assess a shared delusion. A persecutory, there's no psychologists in the family courts who are competent in the assessment of delusional pathology when that's the pathology in the family courts. That's an amazing scandal. Where's your media on this? Where's your major media? Why aren't they coming in and talking to Dr. Childress about the scandal within the courts? I don't know. I don't know. That's a you thing, okay? I've done what I can do on this. So I've documented everything else. And that's one of the cairn that we've passed, is that I got it all. I got it all about the Gardnerian PAS people, about the forensic psychologists, about the licensing boards, the APA. I got all the documentation. That's what we do. When I first started, way back as an undergrad, started with the Suicide Prevention Center, telephone crisis counselor on the Suicide Prevention Center. I started right into things because that's the way I am, getting competent. And so one of the features about working suicide prevention center is documentation. You want you're dealing with a high risk people, so you get off and you document what took place. Then I put myself through my master's program working in psychiatric hospitals as a psych aide. Again, documentation in the medical record. And how do you do that? You don't say the person is depressed. How do you know they're depressed? The person appears depressed. You label, and then you label because they're sitting off by themselves or something. So you appears the category, appears anxious, and then you identify a couple specific instances that support that. So how do you document things? And if it's not in the medical record, something happened with my, there it is. So if it's not in the medical record, if you didn't document it, then it didn't happen. So I don't care if you conducted a risk assessment for suicide. If you didn't write that in the chart, it did not happen. And so I know all about documentation. That's clinical psychologist, clinical director, big 3 university treatment center for children in the foster care system. Our referral source was Child Protective Services. Our funding source was the County Department of Mental Health. County Department of Mental Health, if you work county, they have all sorts of documentation requirements. And if you don't do it right, they're going to pull your funding for those clients. I know documentation, and that's what the psychologists do, is document things up. So I've been over here 10 years, and I've been documenting everything up. That's what I've been doing. But now that's all done. That cairn has passed. So now I'm going to be laying that out. And so whenever the APA or somebody really cares, media, anybody cares, here's the documentation on that. Maybe 2 years, 5 years after I'm dead, they'll start looking at it. But there's a documentation on stuff of what's happening over here. But at this point in time, I'm shifting, okay, that I don't want to spend my time, my last few years here, getting beat up, getting abused, getting slandered, putting my license on the line, having people attack my license, the attorneys, the family courts. I'm just trying to be helpful, okay? So you can take my help or you can reject my help. But I'm done being abused. Okay, that's the other documentation, is that if you abuse the psychologists who come to work with you, you will get no psychologist to come to work with you. That's just a fact. And so all my clinical psychologist people refuse to work in the family courts. The statement you'll hear is, I don't work with high conflict divorce. You want a forensic psychologist. So you don't have any treatment psychologists. You don't have any real psychologists. You have this forensic group who are the worst imaginable. Now, what's going to happen is, because I've educated parents about what the pathology is and what needs to happen, is that parents are going to start asking for a clinical diagnostic assessment of possible persecutory delusion versus child abuse by the targeted parent. That's your differential. Is it child abuse by one parent or child abuse by the other parent? Shared persecutory delusion. And parents are going to start asking for that. The issue that's going to be faced is that you will be unable to find anybody who can do that, either because A, they won't work with you, or B, they're not competent. And if they're not competent and I get a hold of their report for review, then I'm going to take it apart and they could face licensing board complaints and malpractice lawsuits. So it's going to become very dangerous for incompetence in the family courts. And yet that's all that's here is incompetence. And they're not motivated to become competent because then that exposes their incompetence from before. And so the system's going to collapse. That's basically what I anticipate, is that the court's going to want diagnostic assessments, won't be able to get them. Parents will want diagnostic assessments, won't be able to get them. And I'm going to be called in as an expert witness on a number of these cases. And I can do that. That's easy for me as a kind of writing out my professional career here is being called in as an expert witness on these cases. In this last week, these 3 cases that I testify, each one is a different type of role that I was brought in on. And I've testified probably in over 50 types of cases. I'm very experienced in giving court-involved testimony. And because I'm the only one that's kind of competent in everything, I've got like 5 domains of competence that no one else has. I call myself a singular because there's no one else that does this. First, I'm a clinical psychologist. All the rest of them are forensic. I'm the only clinical psychologist in the family courts. But in addition, I have attachment specialization from early childhood mental health. I have child abuse and trauma from clinical director for Clinic for Kids in Foster Care. I have shared persecutory delusions from 12 years of being trained at UCLA in the diagnostic assessment of delusional thought disorders to the authors of the BPRS, Brief Psychiatric Rating Scale, Dr. Lukoff and Dr. Ventura. I'm one of the best trained people on the planet in how to diagnose delusional thought disorders. I think we should be doing the BPRS. Why aren't forensic psychologists doing the BPRS for all families? Because they don't know how to do it, because they're ignorant and incompetent, and they just do what they do, MMPIs that serve no function. So I have delusional thought disorders. I have factitious disorder imposed on another. Okay, and that's Munchausen by proxy from my background in Children's Hospital, Los Angeles, Children's Hospital of Orange County. That's where factitious disorder shows up, is in those domains. I have expertise in family systems therapy. I've been doing that for 20 years. I have special training out of Pepperdine in family systems therapy. And I have court-involved family conflict. I've been here for 10 years. So I have multiple domains of directly relevant professional expertise. So I suspect attorneys are going to be continuing to call me in on their cases, primarily for record review. That's where I'm going to kind of shift down a little bit and just say, I'm doing record review. And if you want me as a consultant on an active case, that's up to you, okay? For me, I'm just going to kind of hunker down, do record reviews of the forensic reports, go through them line by line, take them apart, testify about the pathology, and so people start to care in the family courts and start to do things. Meanwhile, I have 2 assistants. One handles my schedule, the other one handles or helps me with my case management. And I've instructed the one who helps with my case management to start looking into therapy platforms, online therapy platforms, because I want to start shifting my practice over to humanistic existential therapy with adults. Not family court and people, not just adults, humanistic existential therapy with adults, perhaps parents with ADHD as well. I've had some of my consults on my first week of public consults come in and talk to me about ADHD, because I know how ADHD and I know how to fix ADHD. And so go back over there. They don't abuse me. Okay. And the humanistic existential with adults, they don't abuse me. And it's rewarding. It's rewarding to work with people where you can feel the changes take place, where you can, if the ADHD disappears because of what you've done, or the person, the adult grows and gets happy in the world. Those are good things. This world of high conflict divorce is just a brutal world. This is the most savage spousal abuse on the planet. Killing someone's child because you're angry with them. You kill their child. They don't have a child anymore. That's brutal. That's just spousal abuse off the charts. And yet nobody diagnoses it. Everybody just lets it happen. Nobody has any empathy for the spousal abuse. And it's not even discussed within the APA or AFCC. So you can take a look at the next round of the AFCC convention. Take a look at the topics at their convention. How many deal with delusional thought disorders topics? How many deal with factitious disorders? superimposed on another.